You want to explain what we normally do? And then, or have you already done that with Claudia and Russell? Okay.
No. So
well, even if you did, you know that you'd never get a proper straight story out done anyway, so he could have told us anything. He just wrapped around some sort of analogy about the wind breathing through the sun and the sky to make, dreams come true or some shit like that.
Unicorns and butterflies. Yep.
Yeah. Aaron knows exactly.
Have you dealt with me before, Russell?
What's your T-shirt for, Don?
No excuses.
It's a reminder of parenting because he just had his third child.
No, we spoke to him in the hospital.
No, this is our Aaron had these made for our tribe off-site.
Nice.
Hashtag no excuses. Although I'm full of them at the moment, so that's.
I was going to say, I've been making excuses ever since.
He's definitely full of something.
Absolutely right.
Oh, that's nice.
Team effort.
Okay, Russell, Claudia, welcome to the Tribe Transparent podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, I think, on completely different sides of the world. Is that right? No, you're both in New Zealand. Okay, fantastic. That explains the time.
Sides of the office.
So, as I think we foreshadowed, this is pretty freewheeling, so feel free to, it's really a conversation, so not so much of an interview, but I think what we're really keen to hear about from founders that are in our sort of circle is really just their stories, whether it's the good, the bad, the ugly. And typically where we like to start off is the origin story. I think people are always a bit fascinated about what brought you two together in the first place, and how did the current venture that you're working on come together, and maybe talk about how long you guys actually have been working together, because I think that's actually something not many people would know.
That definitely sounds like one for you, Claudia, that one, I reckon. Try to keep it not romantic. Just Business, straight business only.
How many times over the years have we told the story? But anyway,
because you had the same last name, or
with the same last name, it always comes with a disclaimer. Yeah, we're not married, we're not related.
That's too much.
Yeah. So where did it all start? So I think it's maybe 8 years ago now, give or take. It all becomes a bit of a blur that Russell and I first met each other, and interestingly, he's British and I'm a Kiwi, but at the time I was living in London and he was living in New Zealand, and we were both working for a company called Experian, which is a global data bureau provider, for those of you that don't know. And this was before the time of being able to work virtually, but it was a whopping 7 years ago. I was working in a global role in corporate development, so I had to come out to New Zealand for a bunch of weddings and my dad's 60th. So I convinced them that I could work from the New Zealand office for a little bit because I was in a global role. And so I turned up in the Experian office in New Zealand that had 5 people in it, of which one was Russell. And so we sat next to each other, and at the time I was trying to write a speech for my dad's 60th, and having known Russell for 2 minutes, he was like, "Oh, I'll write it for you. It'll be really funny." Way funnier than if you write it. I was like, "I don't even know you. What are you talking about?" Anyway, I wrote the speech, and that was it. And then I went back to London.
How well did it go?
It was cracking. Then I moved back to New Zealand a couple of years later, and we were both Russell had started his own business, and I was advising to some other startups at the time. And we needed, in the startups that I was advising to, one of the things that you really learn quickly is you need really good sales skills. And sales skills are actually probably the hardest things to come up against when you've got startups. And so I was like, who could I get that could come and do some sales work for us? And Russell.
I know. A failed salesperson that's currently flipping envelopes for a business is just made up on the fly.
And he'd already done his own startup, and he needed someone to stuff envelopes. And he was like, who could I get to come and stuff envelopes for me? So anyway, we caught up and both tried to convince the other one to come and work in the businesses they were working in. And neither was interested in the proposition. I was working for an accounting startup at the time, and Russell was like, no, accounting, that's not for me. And so anyway, we just started talking business and startups and the challenges, and our first business idea was formed. And we went with it, and it wasn't APLYiD. So it was another business that's still going today, but it was out of that we really had the idea of APLYiD. So we were working in real estate. It was when the anti-money laundering legislation changed in New Zealand. Russell was working, we'd always worked across identity, knew what identity looked like, data, etc. with the bureaus. And so we saw an opportunity with the change in legislation to create a business called APLYiD and spun it out. I'd say we made so many mistakes at the beginning. One piece of advice that I'd definitely give to founders is not to be scared to spend money on advisors. We did a lot of stuff ourselves, and I'd say definitely that was my fault. Kiwi attitude, can do, number 8 wire, she'll be right, we'll figure it out. And when APLYiD started, the capital structure was 50% owned by one entity and 50% that Russell was working in, and 50% owned by an entity that we were co-working in. And that just doesn't work. So actually, if a business starts to scale and you want to bring in investment, you need to have a standalone corporate structure. So then the challenges of unwinding that and the costs that came with it were actually so much worse. Whereas if we'd done it right at the beginning, it would have just made life so much more simple.
You forgot to add, by the way, you might only get 2 or 3 questions out of this, Elaine, if you direct them. Claudia.
Yeah, sorry.
She does have a tendency.
No, that's okay. No, you do.
This position, and you mentioned from the other side of the world. Well, she's now there in her brain, so we're now like somewhere else. So
no.
Someone else on this call's a bit like that. I won't say who it is, but did that answer your question?
It did, and it's an interesting point that you made around don't be scared to use advisors, because I think there's also been the other side of the coin where startups have been used advisors and been taken advantage of. Knowing when to bring that type of smarts or expertise in and when not to, or who not to and who to bring in, I think is actually one of those things that a lot of small companies and founders that are starting out really struggle with.
I'm surprised you went with that, to be fair. That wouldn't be the first thing I would have grabbed at the time when we were making stupid decisions.
It's the one that you admitted to, but I am going to dig deeper.
What's your stupid decision,
Yeah,
Russell?
I need to hear yours, Russell.
Starting. My stupid decision. Oh, man, I make them on a daily basis.
Me as a founder.
I think the whole Kiwiisms, you can get up and just do it yourself, don't worry about it. Joining forces with the sales guy, as much as it's one of the most powerful things that you can have in your arsenal, you're also faced with a person that believes in their own bullshit quite a lot. So you're also diving in with, we'll be all right. So there's 2 people rolling in with sleeves up and going for it. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because I think the mistakes that you make, your actual real power, your superpower at that time, is you get up and dust yourself off and carry on. I think that's the most powerful thing you can be as an entrepreneur. If you find that you can be that person in general day-to-day normal life, then go for it. If you take every knock really hard, this is not for you. Use advisor. An advisor gives you bad advice, or they take you down the river or whatever. It's just one of those knockbacks that you got to get up and go, okay, we can do this again. Am I allowed to talk about the funny story about the printing story, Claudia, that you made as a mistake way back in the day? Or
Sure. I mean, you tell it all the time. So.
This is only recorded in history now, forever and ever, that you bring it out for the kids when they're older. But we batch processed some brochures for one of the businesses we had way back in the day, and it had a spelling mistake on it. And there was like 5,000 brochures, and it only took 4 or 5 hours of Claudia and a couple of the teams stamping these little things on and putting them all in envelopes ready to be posted. Now I picked it up and I was like, that's spelt wrong. Halfway through sending, it's great. But those are the kind of stupid things at the time. It's so insignificant now, who cares? But at the time you're like, oh my God, we just spent all this money and why didn't I think about it? And you give yourself such big digs for little things like that way back then. Whereas now, those are little great fun anecdotes to big disasters keep on coming. It's just the nature of the beast.
It's change.
Your problems get bigger or change, right, as the company kind of moves through its trajectory. But you mentioned, Russell, that you're both kind of can-do people. You might be the sales expert.
I'm the pretend to do. Claudia's the actual can-do.
Right. Well, this is the bit I wanted to ask about, actually, is do you guys feel that you bring something complementary to the table, and then there's certain traits that you think have been really important that you both have, and it's important that you both have them?
Oh, massively. We're actually not that different as people as we probably look to most. I'm the wild card, the mouthy one that talks rubbish, but actually we both have incredible strength across both sides of the spectrum. We actually make greater decisions and we're better as two minds on one topic than we ever are on one mind on one topic, but we both go off in our lanes to do the jobs. But from day one to still today, we absolutely get the best out of both worlds, from being able to sit in a room and go, we've got a problem, or we've got something that we need to achieve, or blah, blah, blah. Spinning around until we come to a conclusion is where we've always been like that, which is cool.
And why do you think you're better together, Claudia? Is it because you approach a decision differently and have a different perspective?
So I would say Russell's very much the creative. So the ideas, he'll have the ideas and lots of different ideas. And I'm much more of the critical thinking, analysis, pull it to pieces, try and find all the holes in it possible. But the best thing is when I do that, Russell doesn't get offended. Do you know what I mean? So and then he'll pivot and we'll pivot together. And it's almost like you start with a whole bunch of things and you just narrow it down. So that's how the relationship works well, because it's, as Russell said, you bounce back and forth from each other. He'll typically always have the first he might have 10 ideas that he puts on the table. And it's like, we'll just instantly take 5 of them off.
God, I'm exhausting, isn't it?
Down, and then we'll spin through them till we get to a solution that makes sense to move forward. And I think it's that ability and to really debate, and it is debating, because we'll often come at it from a completely different perspective, but neither gets upset or offended, and you just work it through until you both get to that happy place. And that might not happen in one session. You often come to an impasse and be like, we can't agree on this, and so we'll just leave it and then come back to it in another later point, and then you bring a slightly different insight. So it's that kind of iterative process, which I think is really useful. And certainly I feel like being a solo founder would be unbelievably challenging, because you don't have someone that has the same heart, passion, risk, everything else involved. But you've got team members, but it's not quite the same as it being the two of you that did it together. So I think that would be a really hard solo journey. And also I think typically, maybe a little bit like with children, Don, but when you add 3 to the mix, definitely there's always an imbalance, whereas actually having 2 of you. So for a while, when APLYiD first started, there were 3 of us. And it definitely didn't work as well in harmony as having 2, which has just been an interesting...
What do you put that down to? Was it just that particular personality type, or the pure fact it was 3 instead of 2?
Would you mind me answering that one?
Nope.
So I actually think it's really challenging, number one, to have 2 people that just get on in a partnership like we have. We very rarely fall out, squabble or whatever. That's rare, super rare. And there's just a real natural who we are as people that has actually allowed that to happen. I know lots of people in business that have got partners that are a nightmare and it hasn't worked, and that's picking a partner for your life or whatever. It's huge. You spend more time with them than you do with your spouses, probably. So I think at the time, the 3 of us trying to get that right a 3rd time was the reason. I think, one of the reasons that it wasn't working is that you and I have that relationship where we get into an office and we're just brainstorming outwardly. Vocally, we'll talk until we come to a conclusion. It's just the way our brains work, whereas the other person was much more analytical on paper, want to understand the detail, and a bit wasn't into taking risks like we were and stuff like that. So you're just adding a 3rd metric to the spectrum. I don't think it was anyone's fault, but it's just more like getting it right a 3rd time is going to be really tricky. I don't think there is a perfect setup. I think you just have to be really lucky, eyes wide open, that we knew each other for days before we started something. So it's just like, that's mad. Anyone that's listening to that, don't do that. But we've been incredibly really lucky that we stumbled across 2 like-minded people. Either that, or I'm a genius and you're just in my wake.
Patient.
You're making it sound pretty rosy there, Russell. What's been the biggest conflict?
I've got a bottle of vodka underneath here, by the way, just so you. My camera flicks off at any point.
Wouldn't surprise me at all. But no, but has there been you mentioned the word before, Claudia, an impasse. Like, has it been a big moment where, or a period of time, an extended period of time where you've been in tension and conflict that you started to question that co-founder relationship?
What are you trying to do, Aaron?
Just asking a question. No one's not acknowledged.
Aaron is trying to Yoko Ono.
Yeah, what's
Why
going on here?
now.
Breaking up the band, dude.
Aaron's just trying to get his message ready for when Elaine and he kick me out.
That's right.
So what is it about Russell you think's a massive dickhead?
Every day is a challenge, Aaron. Every day is a challenge, but no, there's never been a long period of time where there's been like, we can't come back from this, or it is
Any period of time.
There's no two ways about it.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
That's also what keeps it interesting. I think for me, what makes it work well is you have to have the same overarching goals and ambitions. Are you trying to build a lifestyle business, or are you really trying to build something transformational and massive? And therefore your approach is going to be completely different in terms of how you tackle it. And to what Russell said before, your risk appetite is massive as well. If you're not that much into taking risks and putting things on the line versus if you are, that will create huge conflict that maybe is not easy to get through. But I think when those core sort of driving forces are the same, the decisions that go into delivering that, therefore, while you might approach it in a different way, you're ultimately going for the same overarching goal. And so therefore, I don't think there's been any point where it's been like this, our difference in opinion is not going to come to pass. It always does in some shape or form.
Until right now.
And
Lucky to go back to the UK in 2 weeks, right?
you mentioned conflict, which is Don's favourite topic, actually. And it's something that all of the startups and high growth businesses we work with struggle with. And it sounds like what you guys have been able to do is really develop a system for managing that conflict, because you have the same values and you're aligned in what you're trying to achieve. You may approach it differently, but you've got enough respect and trust amongst the two of you that you can solve that. And whether it's always broad agreement, or it's just, okay, we've picked this way to go and we're going to back it. It sounds like you've landed on a way to manage through that conflict, which has been pretty effective.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'd say that also probably one of our biggest learning curves was the fact that we started off with such a tiny team, and Claudia and I probably spent 90% of our time outside of work talking about it, or inside of work in the boardroom talking about it, and bringing on those, where Don comes into this conversation quite a bit, is you bringing in those senior or trusted people within the business or external to the business. They need to get into the brains. And because Claudia and I are so connected in the way that we make decisions and everything else, it's not that easy for them to catch up to that in some instances. I think it's much better now than it was early days. And as founders, you've got to start to figure out how to not be the doers of absolutely everything. And that is all part and parcel of how you can bring in other people on that journey throughout the course of time.
So actually, that's a topic I think a lot of people would love to hear a little bit more about, because I think all founders have to bring people in at different points and bring them along the journey, and they're always catching up. So what have you found has worked? What has been sort of something that you've thought, God, we'll never do that again? What have been the sort of strategies that you guys have picked to bring those people in, whether they're investors and board members, and there could be anyone along that spectrum, including team members? How do you get them to catch up to your vision?
Or even care about it.
Or care.
So that's it. It is tricky. I think I don't have a formalized plan for it, but I think bringing people into which we're really late at doing this, bringing people into the why we're doing it and the values and the mission and all of that sort of stuff. I'm not particularly corporate for people on this call that know I'm not. That was always a bit like, whatever. Where actually, I think it's crucial as you're recruiting for new people and bringing them into really important positions to be able to get them to come along on the journey really quickly and understand it and get that connection between the two. And trying to figure out whether or not they actually do understand that vision before you hire them. We've made some rocky errors in terms of hiring on gut instinct. We made some amazing ones, and you do all of it on gut. That's the problem. Everything that you do in startup world is completely on gut, because you've got no reference points. There's nothing to go, oh, that's how these guys did it, and they did it all right. Especially in hiring people, you've no idea until you get into it. So I think trying to create like a who are we, what the bloody hell is it we're doing, and why are we doing it, and then spend way more time than you realize you should on, if you pick one person or two person that you want to hire, from my point of view, doing it all over again, wow, what's the rush in taking them straight on? Spend a bit of time, give them a little project to do, so you see them in a meeting or an environment within the team, and actually see whether or not they're, take them on for a couple of drinks with the team if they're going to be really crucial to the business, and see how they handle it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there, what's the rush? But sometimes in that entrepreneurial journey, it always feels like there's no time to spare, and I've got to have these people on right now, otherwise everything falls apart. So what's your advice for that hindsight, insight? How do you actually implement it?
I'd say you're wrong. There is time. Everything feels rushed and panicked, but honestly, unless something's completely screwed and broken, there is time. It's way more expensive to you as a person and as a business in terms of time and money to get rid of someone that's shit than spend an extra week or two on bringing in someone that you really just fall in love with, and this person's going to be excellent at this. And the more multifaceted those people are that bring them in, like the more all-rounders that they are and things that they don't even realize, you can just tell with some specific people, you get way more out of them over time, right? But you're right, the world is on fire and you need to hire loads and loads of people all at once, granted, but key roles, like, I think you've got to spend a little bit more time. That's my take. Claudia's where Claudia jumps in now and disagrees with me, by the way.
I don't disagree, but I think that it's interesting when you make that shift. So when you're small and you're very much incremental hires and you don't need any policies and procedures and you don't write a lot down, right? Everything is in your head and you talk about it around whiteboards and it's very fluid. And so the people that then come on board and be part of the team, they just learn by osmosis, really. You're all part of it. You're all doing it together. And so it just tends to flow. And then it's when do you get to that point that actually you as founders can't be as across it. And so then how do you make sure that that's generally filtering down and flowing in the right ways? Or you might not be across every hire anymore. So then how do you make sure that the people that are doing the hiring are looking for the same things and bringing that in? And I think we certainly it's reasonably easy when you're all in the same office, and COVID changed it a lot because then you're remote and then there's now a sort of hybrid approach to working. But I think the piece that highlighted it more than anything else for us was opening in the UK, because then you're on a 11 to 13 hour time difference. You can never really connect. How do you get that same culture, ethos, mantra, way of approaching things, etc.? How do you translate that over, and how does that all flow through? And I don't have an answer to that, because I think it's really hard. And even if you've got it all written down and things for people to refer to, and you've got proper induction plans and policies, it's still going to be a challenge. We're getting a lot more structured around that stuff now, but we really weren't before at all. And I think we've felt it quite a bit over the years. And it's a tricky one, and I don't think there's a silver bullet anywhere, but it is making that transition from very small early stage team to that next level of scale up, and starting to really document and think through. And your interview process, as Russell said before, it was very much just us having a chat to people. We didn't even have like official interview questions or anything. It's just, you just get a feel for someone and you work it through, versus now I think really we need to be thinking through, what does our interview process look like? How are we doing testing? How are we really getting, especially at the more senior levels, making sure that those people that we're bringing in fit with what we're trying to do and achieve?
Yeah.
One of the things you did do was, as you guys opened up an office in another country, is eventually Russell went to the UK and spent a lot of time in the UK while you held down the fort in New Zealand. So in terms of what you would do differently in the future in opening a new office or in scaling up to a new country, Would you do that again? Would there be something else you would do alongside of having someone else who was a key founder being there on the ground in the new office? Maybe talk to some of those things that you think, oh, if I had my time again, I would definitely do that differently.
Yep, I'll take that one on. That's a big one. So I'm from the UK. Claudia's got the passport too, and I've got a New Zealand one too. So it seemed pretty logical that we'd give the UK a crack. Not only the fact that obviously the anti-money laundering regulations are similar, but we know it not just from where it is, more detailed, the industry. I'm from there more than Claudia is in terms of the industry, ID and data and credit checking, all the rest of it. So it made logical sense, but we didn't set me up straight away. So I went out, did I go out there first? I went out there, we met sales director, hired that person, then took a view to do what everybody does in this space, which is build a massive team, spend loads of money and just go for it. And that was just the nature of what life was like for all businesses that were funded at that time, which do what everybody else is doing. And I did stay there. But if you think about what I was saying earlier on about Claudia and how mine and her brains work in that sort of, how do we decompartmentalize what's going on for us? Throw in a completely different time zone. And the fact we'd spent the last 3-4 years doing that every single day, it ruined most of it. It was a real struggle. And Claudia was here, like you say, holding down the fort. But holding down the fort was both of our jobs. And I really wasn't just the sales guy. We were doing these things together. So we'd gone from complete working together to splitting up for a long period of time. And I was trying to reinstall all of the things that Claudia and I had applied the years into this new set of interesting salespeople. A whole entire room full of new brains and new bodies. And it was good. We were getting to that point, but then I had to come back. I had a life here. So to answer your question of would I do it again and how would I do it differently, I would do it again. I would definitely recommend anyone who wants to do it that I think it would be smart to move there permanently.
Yeah.
If you really believe that the UK is a massive opportunity, then you've got to put the commitment in, because then you're not having to do the time zone difference as much as you normally would. And I think I could do it again. I'd probably say that Claudia and I should do blocks of 2 months together. Just come out there for 2 months as we bed in what APLYiD is to the country. Run a year of that, and then we should be able to get back to probably where we are right now. And through no fault of anybody's, just bad decision making, I guess, across the board, we'd put in a senior person that you just expect that they'd be able to do it. But what we didn't do at all was bring them into the New Zealand world so they understood who we were as a business. So I think if we'd have brought that person over first before we did any hiring and spent 6 months with that person, just getting them to fall into, well, this is APLYiD, so that when they go back, they're like, there's no question about what I need to do or who I am and what I'm doing. So I think you've got to pause it for a bit. You can go and race and chase the revenue, the opportunities and everything else, but they'll still be there in 6 months. But if you put something into the wrong mode and then you're building up a load of team and a load of money and everything else, and despite the fact that we're lucky that we know the UK really well, even to the point where we've got connections right the way across the industry, we were still miles away from where we should have been. So I think that for me, I would change it. I'd bring the person over to New Zealand first and then build.
And in that, when you talk about the miles away from where you should have been, could you just unpack that a little bit more? Was that in terms of like product or market nuances or marketing? Like just for anybody listening that's about to take their product to this new jurisdiction that thinks it's already ready, maybe just talk about that part of the journey.
Yeah, so our technology, we're a facial recognition combined with anti-money laundering software. So really, you just need a facial recognition platform that works in any country, which we've got, and then a data component in that country you can use to verify. So the face and the driver's license and the pictures and bits and pieces all matched to the government data sets and the so on and so forth. So in terms of what it was ready, we could have turned it on from New Zealand and it was working. The nuances that you talk about, Don, are more, what does the market perceive of what your product is in comparison to all the other stuff that they can buy? So in the UK market, for example, it's a very data first. I'll buy some data and I'll verify that Don McKenzie lives at this address. It'll cost me £1, right? Versus what we do, which is a really luxurious onboarding experience with biometrics and all the same data, but it's turned into a really beautiful user flow. But it say it's £5 or £6, and they go, well, I don't want that. I want the £1. Fine when the founders are there and they're explaining and educating and working with the market and everything else, but not great when you've got lots of salespeople that have all spent their time in the industry that sells it for £1. So we didn't take the time to bring them into why it makes more sense to use a product like APLYiD in an environment where those other products are being used, and handle those objections over time and those nuances. The product hasn't changed. It's the same product it was before, but for 6 months to a year, we haven't much to answer the point about what didn't work. We haven't brought on a huge amount of great business, and it was just a bit hit, miss, hit, miss, hit, miss. The other thing is that Claudia and I are not very well versed in the world of marketing, so we started that too late. Go on, Claudia, you want to say something?
Well, yeah, so what I was it's similar along that vein, is that New Zealand's a tiny market, right? So it's very small, and your approach and your go-to-market strategy in New Zealand is actually completely different from the UK, which is a huge market and actually far more competitive than New Zealand. And so that go-to-market strategy is entirely different than what we'd experienced before. And so I think what we thought we could do was just take what we did in New Zealand and were really successful with and plonk it in the UK and be really successful, because the market's huge and there's so much opportunity and away you go. But actually, because the market's huge, you need to have very efficient ways of growing. And I think that the model that we set up wasn't the most efficient way of growing. And so then you can burn too much cash in a short period of time because you've not implemented the right model that's really efficient. So I would say if we were to do it all over again, it would be, I agree with Russell, that first hire, get them to your home base, get them to Australia, get them to New Zealand, get them to spend some time with head office, with the finance team, with the marketing team, with the product team, really get under the bonnet of and go out on sales calls and sit with the local sales team and understand how all that really works is really important. But also, I think really spending time analyzing and critically judging your go-to-market strategy and how is that going to work in this new market, and probably dip your toe in the water a little bit first. To Russell's point, look, especially as well when you do raise venture money, you have an aggressive growth strategy and forecast, and you have to if you want to raise money because you need to show all this growth. But actually, so then it puts this pressure on you and you're like, we've got to hit these targets, and so let's invest in it to hit the targets, versus pushing back a little bit and saying it's going to take a little bit longer, but we're going to really scope it out first. And then once and Don said this to us a lot, but it was almost like we're already down that journey rather than pre the journey, so the timing maybe didn't quite align. But how do you start small, prove it, know that something's really working, and then double down and go on it? And it might well be that an outbound sales strategy is the best way to go for you rather than an inbound marketing strategy, or it might be actually partnerships is the best way to go, or it might be, but there's lots of these different go-to-market avenues, and you can, if you try and do everything all at once, you're still a small business that's cash resource constrained. Puts a lot of pressure on, versus how can you have a go, doesn't work, try another one. But that does come with a downfall because it takes longer. And you don't get the right one first.
You agree with me on the
really not moving forward. So it's challenging no matter what.
You agree with me on the moving to the UK?
Yeah, look, I think that if you had moved to the UK permanently and I'd come out for 2 months at a time, that would probably have been the optimal scenario.
I'm just thinking about all those other businesses that we know that are in the same spot to some degree, and they've now started to go and permanently move there.
Yeah.
Would you change the timing? Because you had quite solid traction in New Zealand before entering the UK. Would you change that timing in hindsight? Maybe explore the UK earlier or leave it until later?
I think the timing was right. I really do. But I think that, just as I say, that go-to-market approach and strategy we could have probably done. And the structure of the team and how we organise that could have been done better.
I do think, though, like, sometimes you have to make these big-ish mistakes. We could be saying all this stuff and someone's going to go, oh, right, okay, great, I'm going to move to the UK now, and it could be an absolute flame of disaster. But these are some of those things, like I said earlier on, the most important thing is to be able to handle it. because it's
and learn from it, and then do something differently.
Learn from it. We learned, we pivoted more times than Ross in Friends. It's like it's true. If you can't be those people, and you don't have people in your business that can help you be those people, and you've got a really solid business, I'd avoid it. That's because we could have not done it, and we've got a really great business, but we wanted to grow, we wanted to go try new markets and everything else, and we were prepared for the risk, and we've handled it. It's not killed us, nearly. I'm only 21. Otherwise,
and I'm asking these questions is not because anyone should feel that they made bad decisions or mistakes. It's more like you made the best decision you could with the information you had at the time. And what we're all just trying to plot out is, with the benefit of hindsight, what could others do to save themselves a bit of time? And I think the advice you both just gave about from a go-to-market strategy, testing it out first, doing some pilots, experimenting, making sure that you
don't procrastinate for too long.
Sorry, say that again, Russell.
Don't procrastinate, because you can keep surveying and testing and surveying and testing, and I'm still not sure.
Yeah,
but then there's got to be a point where you go, I got to risk it for a biscuit and go for it.
I think the other thing that stands out, the way you're describing it, because we get asked a lot for the playbook. What's the playbook for UK or US expansion? But investing in your capability to navigate the uncertainty and the natural mistakes that you're going to make. And so investing actually in your co-founder capability is even more important than having this tried and proven path that is nuanced and probably is completely different for each sector and each startup stage and everything else. So.
Totally agree with that. If Claudia and I didn't have each other and we had to do this on our own, that would be such a key thing, to invest in yourself in terms of getting connected to other people within the same sort of, not in the same industry necessarily, but they're in the same boat. Definitely speaking to you guys, getting as much detail as you can, listening to podcasts like this and going, oh my God, this sounds like a nightmare. But the more stuff that you do it to give you the confidence, and the more pool of people around you that go, oh my God, I've cocked this right up, what do I do now? And someone can say, it'll be all right, don't worry, and take you through what other ideas or avenues, then that's crucial. I don't think there is a playbook. That's why there's 75,000 books available on starting business, because there isn't one. There's just lots of good tidbits right the way through.
I think the other thing of interest to me with your journey, you've taken investment across continents.
Yep.
So not just managing the growth of the business into those markets, but managing different investor relations, different stage of investors coming in. Can you talk through some of those experiences and particularly lessons learnt from that as well?
Well, you better take this one, Claudia. It's going to be a political minefield for me.
You can talk about us. It's fine.
And Russell, if it's just don't engage with Don, that's fine.
Everyone else is fine, just not Don. You're great, Don.
So one of the interesting things for us is we bought Octopus on as our investors. So we decided, because the UK was our growth strategy, having one of the most well-known UK venture capital houses would be fabulous from an experience perspective, a playbook perspective, etc. As it transpires, we were the first company that they invested in from this side of the world, starting in the UK. So they were doing it for the first time as well. Any organizations, I think, that invested in, well, most of them prior, say, were in Europe, and they already had a footprint in the UK. And actually, the time difference wasn't that much of a challenge, and the flights and all of those sorts of things. Whereas when we raised capital, we didn't have any footprint in the UK, zero. So everything that we put forward from a growth and upside and opportunity perspective was all completely hypothetical, rather than already having traction and an establishment and a base to work off. So I think that was quite an interesting learning curve for us. For them, they now have a bunch of companies that they've invested in, and they use a lot of stuff from us to help shape how those companies grow and what it looks like. So there's always a little bit of a challenge of being the first cab off the rank and doing something entirely new. Having investors, I would say, so we've raised angel money originally, and then we moved into VC money, and there is a big difference between the two. So in the early stages when you're raising angel money, I think that actually the landscape has changed considerably now, especially in New Zealand, and I think Australia is the same. But when we did it, like the angel investment groups were just getting going, and you were mostly just going and pitching individual investors, and it was a lot of, do you believe in our story? This is cool, and trying to get that across the line. And then there wasn't a great deal of structure. You didn't really need a board. It was all quite hands-off from that investment perspective. And then when you go into, obviously, the professional investment world, it's just entirely different, because you're dealing with people that do this as a job rather than investing their own personal money. And so therefore it's much more around advice and support, and how do we get the best out of it, and what can we bring you to the table, and how can we help you, and working all of that stuff through. So it's a very different type of investment base. And I think it's what we learned as well. Well, one of the conditions of our investment was to have an independent chair. And it took us longer than it should have to get an independent chair in place. I think it was maybe 18 months in the end from the initial investment to having an independent chair. And for anyone else, I would just say I would actually massively prioritize that, because having a chair that then can be your sort of middle person between founders and investors, that's your support person that you can go to, and they're professional investors, you guys have got to be constantly finding deal flow, right? And especially I look more at Octopus, but they're constantly having to find new investments, and they've got a very small window of time that they can allocate to you. And so you think, oh, I'm going to get all of this guidance and support from my board, but actually they've just got the remit that they've got to run to, and you're trying to do your thing. Whereas bringing an independent chair in that, for us is in the UK and can have those conversations, and we can just catch up with them every week and really work through all the strategic challenges and operational challenges and break it all down, I would say has been transformational for us. I think you've got to be really careful that you find a chair that works with all parties on the board, and that there's lots of respect there. But yeah, it's been such a big difference. So that would be a big piece of advice to me, is when you are raising money from professional investors, just make sure you've got an independent chair or one lined up, because
great advice. And I think people often underestimate how much that person is there for the CEO or the founders. Like they are that conduit to be the advocate for the management team, between the management team and the board. And so having that extra bit of support and someone who can be the translator is really critical.
Well, I think it's also, you step into a board expecting to get lots of learnings from a strategy point of view, and we want to take the business here and all that. So we were very naive in that sense. So we were looking forward to having those sorts of conversations. But Claudia's right. These guys are professional investors. They would want to get the numbers. Why are the numbers no good? Blah, blah, blah. So having someone that we can learn from as an independent chair, and how to engage with the board properly so that it makes sense, but also to get the best out of the board. So the board meetings shifted from really challenging for them for early days, because we didn't know what the hell we were doing, to getting slowly better now. We're getting a lot more out of those meetings. They're a lot shorter than they were. There's not a lot of waffle, apart from when Don occasionally talks. And
do you think that lack of the board weighing in on strategy is because there needs to be, I guess, good information in the first place? Like people need to be working off good information in order to have those good strategic discussions. Was it just that, or is there something more? Do you genuinely think then investors are not bringing this to the table, or it's hard for them to do that at a board meeting? In fact, that it needs to be something that they can be involved in outside of that framework as well?
I think from my perspective, as I said earlier, we hadn't really had formal boards. Neither Russell and I had sat on a board before. And so we were floundering in the dark in terms of what the expectation is from board papers, how to present it in a way that gets the most out of it. And so by having someone early that's independent that can advise you and say, no, don't present it in this way, present it in this way. This is how you need to tell the information and present it so that so your investors or the other directors can really quickly get to the nub of the point because it's clear and communication's clear. When you're running so hard and so fast from an operations perspective, to then be able to step out of that and just present something in a succinct way that just calls out the right things is a skill, right? And it's something that you need to learn. And if you don't have that knowledge, where do you get it from? And we felt it as we went, and I think it did genuinely improve it. But we could have done it so much faster had we had that independent person to just provide that guidance around this is how it needs to be. And I think also, again, we'd step through the paper step by step. And so for us, it really felt like the board meeting was just an update session of everything we already knew to get the other directors up to speed. But there was no value add in terms of what we were getting out of it. So you're like, apart from feeling like everything you were doing was being criticized, because that is, again, that is the role of the board to risk assess and see where it is. But as a founder, it feels like you go and sit in a 3-hour session and basically just get all of your ideas completely shut down and pulled to pieces. And it's really soul destroying. Whereas I think, again, if having that independent chair to say, that's all the information, now let's actually be helpful and strategic and work through the challenges and have a discussion. If there's anything you want to raise in the papers, fine, but actually let's really help move this forward. And so it's been a huge learning curve for us, I would say, over the past.
But the problem is that, I agree. I think you're dealing with with people that have seen it time and time and time again, and that's obviously the vocabulary that you met with. And you're like, but we feel we're different because we're starting up in this own world, and it's our business, and we know different and everything. Not better, but we know different.
Sure.
So the chairperson or the go-between, or maybe even a board meeting or a member could do this, but the go-between between the emotion. For example, you say, hey, well, look, you shouldn't be hiring these people, you should be getting rid of these people. It's all very numbers driven, right? Whereas we're the ones that have actually got to be in it on a daily basis, and then you've got to fulfill all of that in a sheet of 20 slide presentation and a 3-hour meeting once a month, which takes you too much time to put together when you could be doing other things that you should be much more beneficial. Actually I think there should be some things that circumvent or come around board meetings that people like you guys or Octopus or other organizations can do to put extra work into it and say, okay, right, let's take that subject offline and we'll tackle that one for a couple of hours tomorrow because I need to understand it a bit more detail. I'll tell you what I've seen before, and this is what these other companies have done before. Maybe you should go and speak to those organizations and put some time and effort into that, because if they've seen it all before and seen businesses fail before, just saying you've seen it all before and not putting us in front of things that we can actually see it, the granularity of it, it's very tricky just to get out of that meeting and just crack on with your day and forget about it. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, it makes sense. And I know Don has worked with you guys separately on some of those issues that have come out of those kind of conversations that you've taken offline and worked on separately.
Yeah, definitely. And that was really useful. But because we didn't have the independent chair and our own ability to be able to help navigate the best way to give the information, that was where it started to get a little bit challenging because Don was trying to help, but at the same time we couldn't explain, and then we were dealing with day-to-day shit.
No, it's good learning.
There's quite a big difference though. Like, I think the sessions we did with Don were incredibly useful for, as you say, organizational structure, conflict management, how do you get the right stakeholders in a room but that was at the operational level. So I think that was incredibly useful. What I think was lacking for us, and I think in future all investors could think about a little bit more, but is what you said, Elaine, how do you help founders if there isn't an independent chair, which I just think there needs to be faster, but to actually know what they should be putting forward from an investor pack, really providing critical feedback after the board meeting to say, could you present this in a different way? Here's a template, here's a format. Do you know what I mean? Just really starting to tighten that up and give you the tools, even just as a bare minimum. But yeah, I still do think a little bit of it is having someone that is completely independent from investment and operations to link that through. I just think it's so important. Yeah.
No, agreed. Good chat. That was helpful.
So in your mind, given the international opportunity that your product provides, not not wanting to jump at the gun too early, but when does somebody like yourself say, okay, we're ready for the next region? As co-founder, what are you looking out for this time? What do you say? Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. So I think it's really individual, because the mistakes that you make are the things that I said before. We didn't go in with a marketing-led approach because in New Zealand you don't need it. It's a small country and you get brand reputation relatively quickly, negatively or positively, depending on what you're doing. But in the UK, you're just an echo on a wall. There's one for you, Don. You can use that one again. You're nothing. You're going into another country thinking, oh, we're the bee's knees. Look how big we are in New Zealand. You get into the UK, you're like, so who are you? So going in from if we were going to do it again, there's a whole marketing piece and getting right into that. Was that look like? And speaking to some great people, hiring some marketing sites, and now we're in a position where we've actually utilised some great connections to do some exploring in what would be a natural next progression, would potentially be Canada or the USA. We're not saying we're going to do it, but we're getting that intel from utilising government-assisted New Zealand. They've done an amazing bit of research for us, which gives us a bit of a head start. So if we're going to do it, should we just put a little bit of a trickle of marketing in there and see what comes back? Maybe not. These are all these things that we could potentially try. But what I said earlier in terms of move to the UK and start again, I'm not going to America. So I don't think that we're ready yet for those kind of things. But I think you're going to start the wheels in motion, just have little bits of starting to build a bit of an intel, trying a bit of a war chest of things that you should be thinking of. And do you put physical people there? Do you go digital? What organizations do you need to connect up with to get really good intel? Start building up all the things that you know that you're making a mistake with before. Start creating a bit of a mood board. Yeah. And before you're ready to go for it, and then ask as many people as possible that know what you've done before and go, what else did I make a mess of? That's a really good one, actually. I just thought of that. But people like yourselves and Octopus and businesses that we work with in the UK, what did we make a mess of when we first got to know you? And take that with you as well.
So I think when we enter a new market, this will be the point that Russell came in it from a totally different perspective and have a completely different opinion. And we'll ultimately land on some decisions in terms of what we got to do.
Moving to Hawaii, guys.
But yeah, I think from my perspective, looking to next markets, there would be a lot more analysis done than what we did when we went to the UK. So a lot more business planning, a lot more actual structure put around it. So as Russell said, we've done some desktop research so far with NZTE, which is awesome. And that's much more around the regulation. They've done a bunch of interviews with people that is in our target sweet spot. We've honed in exactly what our customer looks like, where our strengths lie, what our ideal customer is, all of that stuff we didn't have very well thought through when we went to the UK. Now that's much, much tighter. It can always get tighter. And then so it's understanding, does the market conditions on a desktop level really stack up, and how do you start to define which market would be the next one? Can you get involved in some accelerators where you're actually talking to people that are on the ground that understand the nuances of the market, where it's different? And there are lots of different accelerators around to do that. So it's looking at that next level of analysis. And then I think it's once you're really confident that, yes, you think that there's a market opportunity there and you've done the market sizing and you've got an idea about what your go-to-market strategy would look like, then you get into the, how do we resource this? And does it need to be a founder? Could we hire someone and bring them to New Zealand for a little bit and to the UK for a bit and understand the piece, and then they run with it and we come back and forth? But all of that needs a really clear 12-month plan that obviously will change, because it's starting in a new market is like a whole new startup. You need to be prepared that your plan's not going to work out, and take a conservative approach. Like, everything's going to take longer and cost more. So make sure that we've really got sort of the lower case scenario and the higher case cost scenario, and can we afford it, and does that stack up? And
make sure
that's what it would look like before we go.
And make sure you want to do it, because it's so taxing going to such massive distances on the other side of the world. And the UK is so big. that we could go to America tomorrow and blah, 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 but there's so much for us to be able to achieve in the UK right now. It's the when as much as the how. And when does it make sense? What is that line that you go, hey, now we're ready to go? Is it to super expand? Have you even got enough ownership of the market that you're chasing in the UK before you go? I don't have the answer to that yet.
I get the temptation to try the US, English speaking, enormous market, but given you're already in the UK, why not other parts of Europe?
Yeah, potentially. With what we do, quite challenging from a product perspective, just the nature of what it is, verifying French passport in France for a small law firm in France would be very problematic. My French is merde. There's plenty of places where you could easily do it from a business to business point of view. So many places in Europe speak English is better than me.
Yeah.
But that's not useful if you're selling a product that works on a small business perspective, or if you're selling to direct to consumer or whatever, because you need to know the language and you need to know the cultural changes. And Europe is, whilst America is difficult from a state to state perspective, there's probably a bunch of states that are relatively similar, depending on what you do, versus Europe being a whole other complicated ballgame. But much nicer for holiday.
Yeah. And that's important. And
It is
actually,
important.
maybe
I'd happily go to Italy and have a crack at that. I may die by some sort of Sicilian mafia at some point down the line, but hey, worth a shot for the food.
last question, just to at least have it end on a slightly...
Don't finish on the Sicilian mafia.
It's such a tax, like you just mentioned. You want to pick something that you really believe in because it will be taxing. Running a business and growing a high growth startup is incredibly taxing, and it's usually all encompassing. What do you guys do to balance that out? What do you do for fun? What's your kind of, what do you do in your own fun?
Well, you've just done something really fun this week, haven't you, Claudia?
Yes, I've just been skiing. I've just been on a girls, when I say girls, I say my girlfriend's ski trip. So that, I love that. I've also got 2 daughters that are primary school age, so they keep me pretty busy outside of work. I'm coaching hockey, and I've never held a hockey stick in my life. So, yeah. Last Saturday, the Saturday before last, we lost 17-0. So I don't know if I have a career as well.
So, just because you don't put a hockey stick in your hand, you know that you've got to give them to the girls, right?
I'm also left-handed, so I was like holding the stick the wrong way up. I think they're only 6, so I'll be forgiven. 7. But yeah, so I'm coaching a bit of kids sport, and I love, for me, exercise is massive, so it keeps me sane. I do quite a bit of meditation on the side, which helps with stress levels. And it's, for me, it's probably a mix of, I quite like things quite hardcore, like skiing and water skiing and high adrenaline, but then equally I balance it out with a bit of quiet time. That would be me.
That's fantastic.
Awesome.
I don't feel like I have quiet time. Mine's more high octane. I like romantic walks on the beach. It's just for you, Don.
Thank you, Russell.
Cozying up in front of the fire with a good book. I'm a big foodie, so actually I take advantage of when I'm in the UK, just going to all the amazing small spots, the big spots, and getting out in Europe is great because being in the UK, it's just so cheap to fly off to a different city whenever you want. And in here, we have such a good team here that we often spend a lot of time with each other. Like tomorrow night, we're going for quiz night, and we do lots of cool stuff together. Quiz night. I'm terrible at it, but I pretend that I know the answers, just the sales confidence in me. And I
also used to be in a band. If you're ever out, just watch out because they'll make you go and do karaoke. And
Russell used to be in band.
Disaster for me.
Yeah.
Because given Don loves karaoke, and in fact, we will tell the story about how Don got kicked out of a karaoke bar. But how have we not done that together when we've been in London?
Well, Don promised a big game when we were in London last with Russell, and karaoke was promised.
It was,
just never eventuated.
Well, Russell never laid it out to play it out.
Well, next time I see you, I'll bring
he couldn't walk fast enough because of his tight jeans.
And no socks.
Correct.
Yeah, he had blisters. Blisters by the time 6 came along.
The next time I see you, we'll get the guitar out, we'll do some tunes.
Because do you know Don is learning again the piano, so I do see a band in our future.
It's sitting next to me. I learned 4 chords last night, following a YouTube.
Were they all the same one?
I look forward to the next meeting.
On that note.
I think.
Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you
Yeah,
taking the time to talk through that and being honest and transparent about everything. I think it's the only way people get anything out of this. So really appreciate it.
And Russell, I'll resend you the template.
I'm not doing it. I'm enjoying walks on the beach, mate.
Yeah. Look, and if it was easy, everyone would do it. And we sitting on the sidelines, whilst we've had our own entrepreneurial journeys, we're not in that depth that you guys are. So we definitely take our hats off to you. We know the personal sacrifice that it takes, and want to continue to do whatever we need to do to improve to support you.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it isn't. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But I think because it's not easy, everyone should do it. Everyone should have a crack at doing something if they feel really passionate about it, and then listen to as many of these war stories as possible. Because it doesn't matter what we're all saying to you, you're going to do it and you're going to cock it up anyway. It's true.
No, it is. It is true.
It's totally true.
Yeah.
When you cock it up, don't worry about it.
How quickly do we learn from the cock-ups?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
You know?
You certainly learn a lot and grow, that's for sure. Much more than you would in any other sort of role, I think.
Yeah. Very true.
All right. Well, we'll let you get back to achieving greatness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Nice.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys. Good to see you.
Good seeing you too. That was good.